In 1933, a woman in rural Kentucky fed 8 people on $11 a month. Not $11 a day, $11 a month. And every one of those people made it through. Number 9 on this list was so effective at stretching a single chicken into a week of meals that butchers quietly stopped telling customers about it. Number 17 was banned by 3 city health departments in the 1940s, called unsanitary, called dangerous. Scientists confirmed 30 years later that it killed bacteria better than what replaced it. These 25 tricks kept American families alive when banks were shuttered, crops were dust, and the government had no answers. They survived because they knew things we forgot the moment prosperity came back. Hit subscribe. Let us count down. Number 25, the drippings jar. Every Depression kitchen had one, a tin can or mason jar sitting right next to the stove, filled with rendered fat strained through a piece of cheesecloth. Bacon grease, chicken drippings, beef fat, whatever came off the pan went into that jar. It sat at room temperature for weeks without going bad because the meat particles were filtered out. Those were what spoiled fat, not the fat itself. That jar replaced butter, replaced cooking oil, replaced lard when the lard ran short. Eggs, fried and saved bacon drippings came out with a depth of flavor that no vegetable oil has ever matched. Cornbread baked in a skillet greased with chicken fat came out with a crust that would make a grown man weep. A pound of butter cost 28 cents in 1933. For families earning $5 a week, butter was a luxury. The drippings jar was free. Every single week, it was free. After the war, the American Heart Association declared animal fat the enemy, and housewives across the country poured those jars down the drain and bought Crisco instead. We now know the trans fats in that Crisco were far more dangerous than anything that ever sat in a bacon grease jar. Studies in the last decade have walked back nearly every claim made against animal fats. Specialty grocery stores sell jars of rendered chicken schmaltz for $9 today. Your great-grandmother made a new one every week without thinking twice about it. Number 24, potato peel broth. The peel never went in the trash, it went in the pot. Potato peels, onion skins, celery tops, carrot ends, whatever came off the vegetables that day got simmered in water for 30 minutes. What came out was a thin, mineral-rich broth with a savory depth that cost absolutely nothing beyond the fuel to heat it. Thickened with a spoonful of cornmeal or a heel of stale bread, it became a soup. Left thin and seasoned, it became a base for everything else cooking that week. Here's what nobody told you. The skin of a potato holds more potassium, more iron, and more vitamin C than the flesh inside. Your great-grandmother was eating the most nutritious part of the vegetable while modern cooks throw it straight into the compost without a second look. That habit did not come from nutritionists. It came from the era that sold you a potato peeler. Number 23, wacky cake. Depression bakers still made birthday cakes. They just did it without eggs, without butter, and without milk, because those things cost money the family did not have. Flour, sugar, cocoa powder, baking soda, a pinch of salt, white vinegar, oil, vanilla, and water. Everything mixed directly in the baking pan, no bowl required. Into the oven it went. The vinegar reacted with the baking soda, and the batter rose into a moist, tender chocolate cake that stayed fresh longer than any butter cake ever did. The chemistry behind it is completely legitimate. Food scientists figured out decades later what Depression mothers figured out in 1932 out of sheer necessity. Vegan bakeries sell this today for $12 a slice and call it a rediscovery. The woman who invented it did not call it vegan. She called it getting dessert on the table. Number 22, oats in the meatloaf. Half a pound of ground beef had to stretch across 7 mouths. The solution was a cup of rolled oats soaked in a splash of milk until soft, then worked thoroughly into the meat with an egg and whatever seasonings were on the shelf. The oats absorbed all the cooking juices, held moisture inside every slice, and kept the loaf from crumbling apart on the plate. 1 pound of meat fed 8 people without a single person feeling cheated. Rolled oats cost 3 cents a cup in 1934. Butchers despise this trick. recipe pamphlets printed by meatpacking companies never once mentioned it. The women passing it neighbor to neighbor at the church steps did not need a pamphlet. Professional chefs do the same thing today and call it a panade when they use bread, then charge $40 a plate for the privilege. Your grandmother called it Wednesday dinner. Number 21, turning the collar. A man's shirt collar wore through before the rest of the shirt showed any wear at all. Replacing the whole shirt cost money that simply was not there. The fix took less than half an hour with a seam ripper and a needle. You removed the collar at the seam, flipped it so the worn edge faced inward against the neck, and reattached it with the fresh fabric showing on the outside. The shirt looked new. When you were competing against 30 men for the same factory job, showing up with a frayed collar meant the other man got hired. One shirt, maintained this way, lasted years longer than anyone thought possible. It was not about vanity. It was arithmetic. Number 20, stretching coffee grounds. Used grounds were spread on the edge of the stove to dry out, then mixed back into the next morning's fresh batch. Roughly 1 part used to 2 parts fresh. The coffee came out weaker. When the choice was between weak coffee and no coffee, weak was plenty fine. Families who wanted to stretch further added dried chicory root, which mimics the bitterness of coffee well enough that it was sold commercially throughout the Depression, specifically as an extender. Chicory contains a fiber called inulin. Today it shows up in probiotic supplements and gut health products at $9 a bag. The marketing has changed entirely. The plant has not moved an inch. Number 19, feed sack fabric. Families were already cutting the stitching from flour and feed sacks and using the cotton for clothing and household goods before anyone thought to encourage it. Then the mills paid attention and made a decision. They started printing those sacks with patterns: gingham checks, flowers, paisleys, plaids. A 50-pound flour sack held enough fabric for a child's dress. 3 sacks made a blouse and a skirt. Quilts, curtains, dish towels, pillowcases, the entire textile budget of a rural household ran on feed sack fabric for years. Mothers at the general store would dig through the whole stack looking for 2 sacks with matching prints so they could finish a garment. The companies were competing on pattern design as much as on product quality. Antique dealers sell Depression-era quilts made from that fabric for hundreds of dollars today. The fabric itself cost nothing. It was the wrapper around something the family already needed to buy. Number 18, vinegar pie. When lemons were too expensive and there was still a need to put something sweet on the Sunday table, farm kitchens across the Midwest reached for apple cider vinegar instead. Vinegar pie is a custard. Eggs, sugar, lard, a tablespoon of vinegar, a pinch of nutmeg, and a simple crust. It bakes firm, slices clean, and tastes startlingly like lemon custard. The acid reads as citrus on the tongue, and the sugar smooths everything into something genuinely pleasant. Most people tried it for the first time and thought they had been fooled with a lemon filling. The vinegar cost almost nothing. The eggs and sugar were already in the house. The pie cost pennies, and nobody at the table went without dessert. Food historians call it a fascinating Depression artifact. Home cooks who actually make it call it surprisingly good. Both of those things are true at the same time. Number 17, honey on wounds. When someone in the family cut themselves and a doctor's visit was out of the question, your grandmother opened the honey jar. Raw honey spread directly onto a cut or scrape and wrapped with a clean cloth. Honey's moisture content is low enough and its pH acidic enough that bacteria genuinely cannot survive in it. That is not folk belief, that is chemistry. Local health departments in multiple states discouraged the practice in the 1940s, called it unsanitary, pushed families toward commercial antiseptics that cost money those families did not have. In 2007, the FDA approved medical-grade honey for wound care. Hospitals use it on burns and post-surgical wounds right now, today, in the present. She was not being old-fashioned. She was about 70 years ahead of schedule. Number 16, newspaper. Insulation. Depression houses were drafty and cold, and heating fuel was a real cost that families measured in meals they could not buy. Folded newspaper stuffed into wall gaps, pressed around window frames and layered under doors. Inside a shoe with a worn sole, a few folded sheets of newsprint stood between a child's foot and a cold floor. Children slept with sheets of newspaper layered between their blankets on the coldest nights. The insulating value of newsprint is real. Trapped air between layers of paper reduces heat transfer the same way modern fiberglass bat insulation does. That same principle drives a billion-dollar outdoor gear industry today. Sleeping bag liners, emergency blankets, insulated jackets. Your great-grandparents figured it out with yesterday's headlines and a cold bedroom. Number 15, dandelion green salad with hot bacon dressing. Before the lawn care industry spent decades teaching Americans that dandelions were the enemy, Depression families treated them as groceries. Young leaves, harvested before the plant flowered, washed and piled into a bowl. The dressing was made hot in the pan where the bacon had just cooked. Bacon fat, a splash of vinegar, a pinch of sugar poured straight over the greens to wilt them slightly. Bitter and bright and substantial enough alongside a piece of cornbread to be a full meal. Dandelion greens carry more vitamin A than carrots and more calcium than a glass of milk. They grow without planting, without watering, without fertilizing, in every yard in America. Americans now spend $2 billion a year on herbicides to destroy a plant their grandmothers ate for free. Nobody told families to stop eating dandelions. The companies selling weed killer did. Number 14, the everything soup pot. There was a pot that never fully emptied. It sat at the back of the stove all week, and it changed every day. Monday's vegetable trimmings went in. Tuesday's chicken carcass joined them. Wednesday's wilting celery tops and onion skins added depth. By Thursday, the pot held something rich and complex that tasted like it had taken considerable skill and effort, because it had just spread across an entire week rather than concentrated into an afternoon. Nothing moved from the table to the trash. It moved to the pot. The constant low heat kept it safe. Each day it fed someone. Each day it tasted slightly different. When refrigerators made storing leftovers separately possible, the perpetual pot disappeared almost overnight. Americans now throw away roughly 40% of the food they purchase. Your great-grandmother threw away almost none and fed 8 people doing it. Number 13, regrowing from scraps. Green onions were bought once. The white root ends went into a jar of water on the windowsill after the green tops were used, and within days, new shoots appeared. Celery bottoms, lettuce hearts, potato eyes, all of them did the same. A potato with 4 eyes produced 4 new plants, and each plant yielded 6 to 8 potatoes. This was not gardening as a weekend hobby. It was survival agriculture practiced on kitchen windowsills and fire escapes across the country. A single bunch of green onions bought for a few cents could regenerate 3 or 4 times before it gave out. Grocery stores need you to buy a new bunch every week. Your grandmother needed to feed her children, so she grew another one from what she had already paid for. Number 12, the bone broth pot. A soup bone from the butcher cost 2 or 3 cents in 1932. Sometimes the butcher gave them away entirely because there was no market for them. Your grandmother put that bone in a pot with water and left it simmering for hours, sometimes for 2 days. What came out was golden and rich, loaded with collagen and minerals and gelatin that set firm when it cooled. She used it as the base for soups, for cooking rice and beans, for thinning gravy, for sipping from a cup when someone was sick. One bone fed a family's cooking needs for the better part of a week. Health food stores sell small cartons of bone broth for $8 today, and influencers drink it from mugs, explaining the benefits. Your great-grandmother knew every one of those benefits in 1934, and she got them from a bone the butcher was about to throw out. Number 11, mending by lamplight. Clothing was not disposable. A sock with a hole in the heel had another 6 months of life in it if someone would sit down with a darning needle, wooden egg, and matching thread. Weaving new thread across the gap in a close grid created a patch that was sometimes stronger than the surrounding original knit. Children's socks were darned and handed down through 3 or 4 siblings before they were retired as cleaning rags. Men's work shirts got patched at the elbows and again at the collar points and again across the back before the fabric was finally too thin to hold another stitch. After the war, the clothing industry pushed disposable fashion, and mending became associated with poverty rather than sense. Americans now throw away 81 pounds of clothing per year per person. Your great-grandmother's entire household threw away almost nothing because she sat by the lamp after the children went to bed and stitched it back together. Number 10, salt pork as a flavor engine. Before bouillon cubes and flavor packets and specialty stocks, Depression kitchens had a slab of salt pork hanging in the pantry. A thick chunk placed in the bottom of a pot of dried beans released fat, deep salt, and concentrated pork flavor into every bean as it cooked. Collard greens that started out tough and bitter turned into something rich and satisfying after an hour simmering with a piece of salt pork. A pound cost 10 cents in 1933, and it flavored weeks of cooking because families used it in small pieces at a time, always stretching it, never wasting a scrap of the flavor it had left to give. No refrigeration needed. Modern cooks chase that same depth of flavor through expensive stocks, specialty seasonings, and umami pastes. Your great-grandmother got it from a chunk of cured pork that lasted months in the pantry and cost almost nothing per use. Number 9, stale bread revival. Hard bread was not garbage. It was an ingredient waiting for the right technique. A stale loaf wrapped in a damp cloth and placed in a low oven for 10 minutes came out soft and warm and nearly indistinguishable from fresh. The steam rehydrated it from the outside in, and the gentle heat set it before it could turn soggy. Too far gone for that treatment, the bread got torn into pieces, soaked in milk and eggs and a little sugar and vanilla, and baked into bread pudding. A handful of raisins or a sprinkle of cinnamon turned it into something children asked for by name. A Depression kitchen extracted 3 or 4 meals from a single loaf before anything went to waste. The average American household today throws away the equivalent of roughly 1 loaf of bread every single week. Uneaten bread is consistently among the most wasted foods in the country. Your great-grandmother would have found that genuinely incomprehensible. Number 8, watermelon rind pickles. A Depression watermelon fed the family in 3 stages. The red flesh was eaten fresh the day it was cut. The white rind, the thick layer between the flesh and the green skin that most people today throw straight into the garbage without thinking about it, was cubed and simmered in a syrup of vinegar, sugar, cinnamon, and cloves until the pieces turned translucent and sweet. What came out of that pot were spiced pickled rind that kept for months in sealed jars and turned a bowl of plain beans into something that felt like a proper meal. Sweet, tangy, warmly spiced. Specialty food stores sell Depression-era watermelon rind pickles as a Southern delicacy for $4 a jar. Food writers call it a rediscovered American staple. Your great-grandmother called it not throwing away the melon. Number 7, tomato soup cake. Condensed tomato soup was one of the cheapest canned goods available during the Depression, and Depression bakers figured out something that sounds completely wrong until you taste it. A can of tomato soup made an exceptionally moist, warmly spiced cake. The acid in the tomatoes reacted with the baking soda in the recipe, and the batter rose. The tomato flavor disappeared entirely behind cinnamon, nutmeg, and cloves, leaving a spiced tea cake that stayed soft for days. At 8 cents a can, it substituted for eggs and fat and extra leavening in a single step. Women brought it to church socials and nobody guessed the ingredient. Campbell's eventually printed the recipe right on the label. That was not generosity toward home cooks. That was a company noticing that families were finding uses for their product that nobody had advertised and deciding to get in front of it. Number 6, rendering lard at home. Nothing from a butchered animal was wasted, and the fat trimmings were no exception. Cut into small pieces and melted slowly in a heavy pot over low heat, the fat released itself from the surrounding tissue. The solid bits left behind were the cracklings, browned and crisp. Salted while hot, they were eaten as a snack or crumbled into cornbread batter. The clear liquid fat poured through a cloth into jars and set into pure white lard, shelf-stable for months without refrigeration. That lard went into pie crusts that shattered perfectly, biscuits that rose in distinct flaky layers, cornbread with a crust that no vegetable shortening has ever replicated. A Depression family bought a pork shoulder and used every fraction of it. The meat fed the family, the bone went in the soup pot. The fat became lard, the cracklings went to the cornbread, The only thing that ended up in the trash was what was literally indigestible, and even that went to the compost or the garden. Number 5, the mustard plaster. When children came down with chest colds and a doctor's visit cost more than the family earned in a day, your great-grandmother went to the spice tin. Dry mustard powder mixed with flour and lard to form a paste, spread on a folded cloth, placed against the chest for 20 minutes. Never applied directly to skin. Always on cloth, always timed, always watched. The mustard oils acted as a counter-irritant, drawing blood to the surface, loosening tight muscles, and helping break up congestion that had settled deep in the chest. It was a standard treatment in military medical manuals through both world wars. The active compounds in mustard that create the heat and the drawing sensation are real, and their effect on surface circulation is measurable and documented. Modern menthol chest rubs work on the exact same principle. Your great-grandmother achieved the same result with a spoonful of dry mustard from the shelf, and it cost her almost nothing. Number 4, potato water bread. When potatoes were boiled for supper, the cooking water was not poured down the drain. It went into a jar and sat by the stove waiting for bread day. Used in place of plain water in the dough, the potato starch fed the yeast more efficiently, produced a more reliable rise, and created a loaf with a noticeably different texture, tender through the crumb, with a crust that stayed crisp but did not go hard, and the bread held its softness 2 or 3 days longer than a standard loaf. Depression families baked their own bread because a loaf from the bakery cost 3 to 4 times as much as one made at home, and the potato water made a better loaf anyway. Artisan bakers today add mashed potato directly to dough to get the same texture and charge a $4 premium for it. The Depression versions use the cloudy water left behind in the pot, the part that would have cost nothing under any circumstances. Number 3, vinegar as medicine. 1 gallon of apple cider vinegar cost 20 cents in 1933, and almost none of it went on salads. Sunburns got a cool, diluted compress. Sore throats were gargled with warm water and vinegar and honey. Lice, which spread quickly in school buildings during the Depression, were treated by rinsing hair thoroughly in diluted vinegar, which dissolved the adhesive that held the eggs to the hair shaft. A tablespoon stirred into water before meals settled digestive trouble that kept working people home from work they could not afford to miss. And vinegar pickled everything that was starting to turn, extending produce from a few days to months in a sealed jar. 1 gallon did the work of what we now purchase as 5 or 6 separate products, each one in its own bottle, each one with its own marketing campaign explaining why you need it and cannot live without it. Acetic acid is genuinely active against bacteria and fungi. The science was always there. The industry just found a way to sell you the same chemistry at a higher price per use. Number 2, preserving eggs in water glass. Chickens laid heavily in spring and slowed to almost nothing through the dark months of winter. The solution was a ceramic crock, cold water, and sodium silicate sold at hardware stores as water glass for about 20 cents a jar. Fresh, unwashed eggs lowered carefully into the solution had their porous shells sealed against air and bacteria. Eggs stored this way in a cool cellar stayed fully edible for 6 to 9 months at room temperature. A family that put up 200 eggs in April had breakfast through January without buying a single one from a store. 1 jar of water glass preserved 10 dozen eggs. The U.S. Department of Agriculture recommended this technique in their own preservation guides during World War II. After the war ended, they quietly stopped mentioning it. Refrigerator companies were advertising heavily, and nobody in Washington was going to recommend a 20-cent solution when a major industry had just invested in convincing Americans they needed an appliance instead. Number 1, the whole system. The most powerful Depression-era trick was never a single trick. It was the thinking underneath every trick on this list. Depression families did not ask what they had. They asked what they could pull out of what they had. A chicken was not a meal. It was a week of meals. The roast on Sunday, cold sliced meat on Monday, bones in the pot on Tuesday, broth stretched into soup on Wednesday and Thursday. A sliver of soap too small to hold was dropped into a jar of other slivers until there were enough to melt into a new bar. Clothing was worn and repaired and handed down and cut down for younger children and eventually torn into cleaning rags. Nothing went from useful to trash in a single step. There was always an intermediate use, always another thing the object had left to give before it was truly spent. That is the trick nobody wrote on an index card, because it was not a recipe. It was an understanding passed between people who had learned through genuine hardship that every resource contains more than its obvious first use suggests. Try one thing this week: save the bacon drippings, boil the chicken carcass, wrap the stale bread in a damp cloth, and give it 10 minutes in a low oven. Then tell me your great-grandmother was just being old-fashioned. Tell me she did not know things we have been paying companies to replicate for 90 years. These were not the habits of people who had given up. They were the habits of people who refused to. Your great-grandparents knew every one of them. Now you do too.